Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to join us today for this policy dialogue to explore prospects for closer EU-Japan cooperation, in particular focusing on economic security. It's very good to have this cooperation continue. We've been working for a long time with Japanese organizations, with the Japanese mission here. But it's even more important in the current environment that like-minded countries, and I'm sure we'll get into a discussion of what like-minded means, but that like-minded countries are working together. And it's particularly good to have the Japan Institute of International Affairs here. We're very glad to also continue the discussion with you on economic security. In many ways, Japan has been a role model for the EU when it comes to economic security. Europe has been waking up to the need to look at economic interdependence as something which, yes, brings many benefits, but can also be weaponized. And there has been a lot of activity at the European level, but clearly there has been a lot of work in Japan over the last years, decades, on economic security. So we still have a lot to learn. We now have a big emphasis on economic security in, I think I can still say the new commission, but it's already starting, of course, to be very much working. And we now have Commissioner Maros Sefcovic at the head of a Directorate General for Trade and Economic Security. So clearly it has become part of what we focus on. But it also shows very much that economic security is a global topic at the moment. And clearly there is an issue with the big powers in the world. We are both looking east and west in terms of the challenges which we are facing. And we're seeing that there are many tough choices, many difficult choices ahead to deal with the economic security challenges, with the vulnerabilities which are there. I think in that we can very much not only learn from Japan, but work together with Japan, both at the official level, but also at the think tank level. Because I do think that when we look at how policy is made globally now, think tanks are taking a bigger and bigger role in these kind of discussions. So finding a way forward, thinking about what we have called, for example, an economic security alliance, are, I think, the jobs for think tanks. So I'm very much happy that we are having this discussion today, and looking forward to the proceedings. But before getting there, I also want to invite Director Tomoyuki Yoshida to say a couple of words on your institute's behalf, and thank you for being here.
Well, distinguished guests and speakers, as well as their wonderful audience today. I'm Tomoyuki Yoshida, the Chief Executive Director of the Japan Institute of International Affairs. I would first extend my warm, huge appreciation for the people of the European Policy Center, PC. And this is quite extraordinary opportunity to deepen our partnership as well as the interact with the resource intellectual people in Brussels. Well, at the outset, I would say a few words about today's title of the economic security. The globalization and the free economic activity have been drivers of the prosperity and the development of the majority of countries. But also it has brought about some negative aspects. It generated those who have and those who doesn't have, thereby enhance the disparity, and also the specific countries' dominance of the market, as well as the too much dependence on specific countries with respect to the procurement of critical resources. Thereby, supply chain has been weaponized by these countries. And also, there is a problem with the overproduction, and even this field covers just not the critical emerging technology, but also the daily usual commodities, as was the example of the shortage of masks and medication during the COVID-19. So the subject of the economic security covers a wide spectrum of economic activities. The measures cover export restriction, diversification of supply chain, and friendshoring, reshoring, thereby decoupling and de-risking the economic activities. And even the introduction of the security clearance in the private sector. And many of them, all these issues are mainly we need to address to vis-a-vis China. But now we have another perspective of the problem. The tariff ban Donald Trump incurs a huge tariff against just not to China, but also friends and allies of the United States. If these countries retaliate massively, that tit for tat dynamics leading up to the economic recession, and thereby impacting all the world economy. Therefore, this is quite appropriate moment that like-minded countries like Europe and Japan get together to deepen our common perception and pursue the way that to solve this problem. That may include safeguarding the national interest of our nations threatened by the economic security challenges. Simultaneously, also, we shouldn't undermine the free and fair open economic activities, which is necessary for the healthy competition among the private sectors and effective allocation of the economic resources. And finally, we need to salvage the free and open rule-based economic order, which is now in the process of erosion, particularly the architecture proposed by WTO. So saying that I stop here, and I would expect for the quite lively and interactive discussions today. And also I would pay huge tribute to today's panelists, all of you. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Naoko of Gakushuin University, and I'm also a research senior fellow and head of China group at the Institute of Economics in Tokyo. Today I would like to express my deep gratitude first to EPA and JAIA for co-hosting this event in a very great change of the international environment. And I hope the discussion here today with distinguished experts will be give you a kind of hints or idea how we can deal with this situation in addition to the collaboration with EU-Japan, between EU and Japan. I myself is a China researcher who is focusing on Japan-China relation and Chinese contemporary politics. But at the same time, I'm curiously researching about the Chinese economic policy, economic security strategy, not only to Japan, but also to the world as well. So I myself is also very curious how the discussion today between EU and Japan will be expanded. As the first speaker, I'd like to invite you, Mr. Marco Chiruro, the deputy head of the unit at the DD Trade, and who is also responsible for the policy towards Far East. Marco, could I ask you how, first, about your unit? What are you doing on the economic security policy as overall? And at the same time, in what kind of elements you find on the issue of collaboration with Japan?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. First of all, let's start, as you were saying, I come from DG Trade. My name is Marco Chirullo, and I'm the deputy head of unit in charge of Far East. So it's Japan, but it happens to be also China and the whole region. So Korea, Taiwan, which puts us in a kind of a privileged position to deal with the economic security dimension, the assessment of the risks, and very often that is linked to China itself, and the partnering dimension of the EU economic security strategy, which sees Japan as a very privileged partner in this respect. So when it comes to what we do as DG Trade, and in particular our unit, of course, we contribute to the ongoing rollout of the economic security strategy, which in the case of DG Trade focuses a lot on the risk assessment when it comes to trade dependencies and weaponization. And that's the work that is ongoing within DG Trade and with other DGs. Of course, there are 4 different types of risks. I will not expand on that unless you want later on the type of risk assessment that the Commission at large is conducting. But when it comes to DG Trade, it is a lot of about dependencies and the risk of weaponization, trade weaponization of such dependencies. And of course, with a focus on issues such as tech leakage as well. And that basically is the basis of our engagement with Japan over the last, I would say, 3 years at least. I always start by saying that being in charge of Japan, I'm also in charge when there's a bilateral summit of the negotiation of the joint statement with the Japanese counterparts. And at the last summit, I remember that the big issue was whether we should call economic security as such, or with other convoluted expressions, because the very concept of having an economic security strategy had not, the summit took place a few weeks before actually we issued the economic security strategy, but there was still reluctance to call it by that name. We had used that expression in G7, but as you know, is not formally an EU position that is expressed in G7. But this is just to say how quick things advanced. For the summit in May, it wasn't really clear. Then in the end, we made use of the expression economic security. In June, we had the economic security strategy, which was issued around that period. And from there on, it has all be about putting the meat around the bones there and substantiating our economic security strategy. With Japan, specifically, we have a high-level political opportunity to discuss all issues that are beyond the implementation of the economic partnership agreement. It's in the context of the high-level economic dialogue, which was set up in 2018. And to be frank, at the time, the idea was rather to focus on issues, strategic issues such as digitalization, or maybe the green transition, all issues that the trade agreement would not directly cover, but there would still be strategic issues that needed to be covered in our economic exchange with in our bilateral relation. Since then, actually, the high-level dialogue has become the political forum where economic security issues are tackled. The first high-level dialogue took place in 2018. The second was actually 2 years ago, 2 years and a half ago. And since then, we had 4 meetings, and the commissioner is likely to go to Japan. Commissioner Šefčovič is likely to go to Japan for another high-level dialogue meeting sometimes later in spring. Not confirmed, but just to give you an idea, so date and discussions are ongoing. Don't take it as a piece of news, but that can give you a sense of the sense of urgency that there is on both sides to discuss issues such as the way our economic security is, respective economic security strategies are implemented. And as it was said already, the EU side has a lot to learn from Japan, because Japan started earlier, and also when it comes to risk assessments, not least because of its geographical situation. Well, they're fairly advanced in their risk assessment, and at large, I would say about risk related to economic security and security, of course, at large. So we do discuss that, but we do discuss, and I would say it's the main dish, supply chains. In October 2023, we have established a working group on the resilience, on international cooperation on the resilience, as basically working group on the resilience, sustainability and transparency of supply chains. And the idea, which responds to the report, to the high-level dialogue, which has met at technical level, at my level a few times, and at senior official level, led by our DDG, Maria Martin Prat, co-chaired by her with Meti and Mofa, to discuss about supply chains. What precisely? But, well, issues such as how do we make our supply chains more resilient? Shall we define horizontal criteria? We have some, for example, in NZIA, in the Net Zero Industry Act, when it comes to sourcing from the second most important sourcing country, instead of focusing on the first, of course, which in most of the cases is China. And Japan has also been developing its own resilience criteria. Those resilience criteria can be part of criteria that are enshrined in the way we provide support to industry to build up their capabilities. It can be in procurement. It can be they can be placed in research programs. Horizon Europe could be an example. In the way we finance actually business initiatives. So the idea with Japan is to make sure that while we build up our own responses, political responses to the need to ensure that our supply chains are resilient, Well, we do it in a way that makes it compatible and keeps our respective market open to each other. Because the temptation, and I don't need to expand on that these days, the temptation is to become more and more inward looking, and we see some arguably like-minded countries that they are doing that more and more. And the idea, and I think on that Japan, because the proposal I would say came firstly from Japan. Japan was looking forward and had a very clear way of projecting the future risks. They came to us saying, we have to make sure that we have achieved with the EPA, which is that level of market access openness to each other remains, and that we design our responses in a way that does not jeopardize that level of openness vis-a-vis ourselves, but also more broadly speaking, because we're not the only ones who look at that. When it comes to G7 and beyond G7 members, I'm also responsible for Korea. Well, and the commissioner has just established with Korea a specialized committee on emerging economic and trade issues. We can translate it with economic security. They are also developing their own frameworks, and there is value in making sure that we keep out of our supply chains management the risks, while keeping in the benefits coming from partnering, which, as you know, is one of the three fundamental pillars of our economic security strategy. So the working group discusses these things and reports to the high level, and the high level has been discussing issues such as those I've just mentioned, of course, with specific focus, critical raw materials. And again, I come to an issue where we speak with one voice, I would say, with Japan. Both Japan and the EU don't have access to key critical raw materials. There's need to source them from reliable and sustainable sources. There's a need to engage with China on those issues, because China is not always replaceable. But at the same time, there's the issue of export control. That is something we need to engage on among partners, and with China. That type of discussion is important, making sure that our respective business can provide us with the information when it comes to stockpiling needs with shortages coming up. And we know, for instance, when it comes to certain critical raw materials facing export control measures by China, that there has been some impact, especially on the Chinese side, but might come, on the Japanese side, but might come on the European side, gallium, for instance, germanium. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. We are fully aware that we need to work together on tech leakage issues, to cooperate on issues such as artificial intelligence and how that can have an impact in terms of supply chains, and what needs to be there to be done in that case. So that is where we are. And I think one important development, and it has been mentioned under the new commission, is that the Commissioner Šefčovič is in charge, of course, of trade policy, but also at large of economic security. Now, if we look at the engagement of Japan with the European Commission, Japan has established, and in particular METI, working groups on supply chains with DG GROW, with DG ENER. They have, of course, ongoing discussions with DG Connect. Now, when it comes to supply chains resilience and the criteria, which could be, as I said, horizontal criteria or sector-specific criteria in order to ensure resilience of supply chains, well, there's on our side the need to make sure that we have a consistent framework in our engagement with Japan, so that we can indeed produce the needed effect in terms of cooperation. All that with the commissioner in charge of economic security, as it is the case now, is certainly easier. And the commissioner, when and if it is confirmed, will be traveling to Japan in the coming weeks. It will come with that background and with that possibility to steer on the EU side even more efficiently the internal work of the Commission, and the design of the responses and the opportunity of engagement with Japan. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for informative and quite insightful opening remarks. And I would like to pose the following question for you, because you didn't, yes, I agree mostly on the point you made that we have plenty of issues that we can collaborate with, and as for the framework as well. But that's where you didn't touch upon in your remarks, it was that I think the investment, the foreign direct investment toward EU, maybe the controlled by already, but the investment toward China, what we expect it will be increased for this year, especially like today. There's a big international high-level conference held in Beijing. Plenty of Japanese and European business actors are visiting there, quite high-level leading business persons were willingly have some quite, how can I say, warm dialogue with Beijing. So I think the atmosphere here and the atmosphere of Métis of Japan is quite similar, but at the same time, atmosphere of business field is quite different now. So I would like to ask you, you may not need to control all the investment towards China, but related to the tech leaks issue, you may need to touch upon, or you may need to have a intelligence sharing with the private sectors. So if you have already doing something on this issue later on, not right now, but I'd like to return to you later. And for next speaker, I'd like to invite our colleague, Miss Maiko Takeuchi, who is a consulting fellow at the Research Institute of Economy, Trade and Industry, and also the member of the JAI delegation this time. She was previously employed by the Ministry of Defense and was involved in sanctions against North Korea and touched upon several sanction issues as an expert. Maiko, I'd like to ask you, of course, the Japanese perspective on economic security, especially on your expertise, related to your expertise, how the technology issue or how the approach on the ground is going on. Approach to not only to economic security, but as a whole of the Japanese understanding or Japanese approach to collaboration with the other countries, or as such. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Eto, for the kind introduction. And my name is Maiko Takeuchi. I'm a fellow of the RIETI, that's under METI, the Research Institute of METI, that's the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Yes, right. So, but today, my argument is solely on behalf of my individual capacity, not representing JAI or the Ministry of METI. Okay, I try not to say this mouthful abbreviation again. So, mouthful names. But so let me start the argument how the economic sanction overall is taken in Japan and how we can do. Yeah, like. My observation here is like even in Japan, all this economic security has multiple aspects, and every industry is talking in sometimes feel different languages. And the challenge here is how. Okay, now it's economic security in Japan is a buzzword. It's a boom. So every ministry have economics safety or security divisions, and of course, METI, MOFA, all our companies. But the question is how much you collaborate, how much you are talking in the same language or same things. And also, like from my observation, because of the law, economics security law in Japan, Japan has in Japan, but that means economic security and sometimes export control, trade control under the trade control law, like trade, that kind of like a separately taken. So the challenge Japan have right now is how to promote the agent across the agency or across the sector collaboration. And as such, I can also say the importance of the collaboration with Japan and EU, because we both have the we both have the commonality. We both rely on predictable, transparent, regular industrial environment, trade environment, while we are both vulnerable from economic coercion and also the heavily rely on to the resources. So that now Japan is, as I totally agree with my colleague on the needs of diversification of the sourcing, and also how they including energy, rare materials, and also, but at the same time, how then in that case, where is a target region and how do it? So for example, like this is then my proposal, for example, and Japan and EU can of course collaborate in how to develop the diversify the economic sources by regionally, say Africa, close collaboration with Africa or ASEAN region, while we can also collaborate in technology-wise in a green energy, nuclear energy, and urban mining. That's a METI is really heavily on, like working on, because we all have all the gold mine here, and how we that's super micro approach, but it's very important. And also, like we think about the investment screening, that's also closely related to the industrial nationwide and international collaboration is needed, because same as economic sanction implementation, we got to do it together. If other, like even though one region or country jurisdiction have the rigorous control of economic investment screening, export control, if similarly competing region has a different ID or looser control, then the effort of one region, one jurisdiction might be severely affected, diminish the value. So as such, there's this two areas, like how to diversify the source and energy resource and energy sourcing, and also how to screen the foreign investment, and then the export control. These are areas that we can collaborate with the other jurisdiction, while in industry in Japan or cross-government, across agency approach is needed. So here I want to introduce one example. For example, that's one area I was concerned if we have this Japan and EU has a good collaboration in resource development together. One area I thought it's an issue is human rights due diligence. EU is way advanced, while Japan is still like learning, led by METI also. The human rights due diligence is such a crucial area, might affect severely when we start collaboration in the development or in Asia or Africa or even Middle East region, because there are some countries who severely has a human rights issue, and then how much we can collaborate. Maybe in Japanese industry, maybe it's not so well aware, we are not aware yet, so that, okay, let's go. And then maybe EU, their own, like a standard, wait, we have to, be careful about how to incorporate our value-based standard into EU-Japan collaboration. Then that, as such, this is one of the area. And I have a good news for you though. So because we are just the big 10 electronic company in Japan, including Panasonic, NEC, like that, they started their own initiative with their to facilitate the compliance with the human rights due diligence with their trading companies, trading partner in domestic trading company, so that, say, like their subsidiaries, they are sometimes it's small or middle-sized company, they are not always have the capacity to implement all this, compliance program. That's I witnessed a lot. But how such? So what the NEC and other big 10 Japanese electronic company now initiated the program, so that they can to support their subsidiaries' effort to comply with all the EU value-based standard, so that as such, this type of that initiative will that kind of industry-led initiative will will promote overall awareness in Japan. And also and this happens because Japan has a strength of the close tie between industry and authority. So as such, sometimes when I was inside of the ministry, of course, I am critical about, you know what, or I'm in the United Nations, I always want to say, you know what, this such a stovepipe, what's a silo-based, like a Japanese authorities' attitude can really negatively affect the swift work, especially nowadays, as Professor Eto also know that swiftly changing economic and trade environment and economic coercion, and then in that case, if you don't all the ministry, Métis, MOFA, or the ministry doesn't collaborate each other, oh, come on, you never be successfully address the common, not threat, common challenge to work with. But so as such, that kind of like a strong, but at the same time, the strong tie between authority and industry is a great support when the industry also can willing to collaborate with the authorities' policy for their own survival eventually. So as such, the Japanese governmental structure can positively affect this Japan's effort. So I have to stop here, but that as such, all these using Japanese strength with the close collaboration is the key. And only thing the caveat of my argument is that, of course, I intentionally focus on Japan because I know when it comes to EU collaboration, all 27 countries have their own a geographical challenge and economic and trade and structure. So for the granular discussion on what kind of program we can do together needs more like the detailed analysis. So I'm just saying EU, Japan collaboration. It's kind of easy word, but when you look into the exact meaning, it's very challenging. That I need your expertise. But anyways, what I want to focus on is, as Marco says, we both can learn each other, and also we have to collaborate together and sometimes even compromise together, because all this unified action to address economic coercion or even economic sanction, trade investment screening, all these things needs a coordination and collaboration and compromise. Let me start this. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Michael, thank you very much. You already partly answered the question I posed to Marco from the case of Japan, but I also would like to ask you later when you will have a time to answer this question, but ask you, when we talk about the due diligence, we come up with the other actor between EU and Japan, United States. How, considering the narratives US is sending out to the world, how we can find the implication to make a framework on the due diligence or such kind of human rights issues together. I think the strategic narrative with EU and Japan will matter not only a lot to China, but also as an international understanding of human rights, or what kind of due diligence need to be promoted in a sense of norms of the framework. So I'd like to ask you what should be the implication if we have a discussion over these issues with EU side from Japanese perspective. Thank you. And for the next speaker, I would like to invite the Pawel Świeboda. I'm sorry if I pronounce wrongly, but thank you. And I'm a senior advisor and a colleague of the Economic Security Forum, the EPC's flagship project, in my understanding, on the economic security. Pawel, I would like to ask you to elaborate a little particular issue that you work on from your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have already seen that EU and Japan have a thriving relationship on economic security. But the bad news is that we are in the middle of a perfect storm internationally. And I think the question that we should be asking ourselves is is the current framework of the collaboration enough to weather the storms. And my answer will be, well, it's a great beginning. It's wonderful that we have it, because if we didn't have it, we would be worse off. But we need to go much deeper than that, and we need to do that quickly. Taking one step back, I think the approaches to economic security on the Japanese and European sides align very closely. In Europe, economic security may not be on everyone's minds in the way that Maiko just described is the case in Japan. But economic security has made it to the very center stage of policy making. We can see it's one of the three pillars in the famous Draghi report last year. So addressing dependencies and increasing security is one of the three pillars, coming on top of closing the innovation gap and bridging the decarbonization and competitiveness agendas. These are the other two pillars. It is also one of the three pillars of the competitiveness compass adopted in January by the European Commission, which is basically the economic Bible of von der Leyen II Commission. So even though it's not always called economic security umbrella, it is there, right? And it is now also in the hands of Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, first time ever that this arrangement is taking place. So economic security in the European version is closer to the foreign economic relations. But the other elements of economic security are covered elsewhere, especially in the competitiveness agenda. At the EPC, we would have wished this to be much more holistic and much more focused on economic security. We had a framework paper on that last year. We think it should be a 360-degree policy on economic security, because everything matters. It matters what you do domestically to promote industries. It matters how you build partnerships, and it matters how you de-risk, right? And it has to be done in conjunction. And you have to have a good overview of what you are doing. So just focusing on the foreign economic relations aspect is important, but it's not quite enough. Now, I mentioned we are in the middle of a perfect storm. So a year ago and a couple of years ago, we were worried about Chinese overcapacities. Well, the bad news is that they are likely to get even bigger with the side effects of Donald Trump's tariffs. On the other hand, China is now pursuing what seems to be a genuine effort to grow the domestic levers of growth. The jury is out, it's early days. These efforts have not worked in the past, but they seem to be genuine as we speak. So perhaps the problem of overcapacities will not be as stark as we may project it to be. But then we have the trade turbulence coming from the United States, which is likely to be of prolonged nature with a lot of secondary effects. And these secondary effects will influence everything that EU and Japan are doing together on the resilience of supply chains. And what is more, representatives of the US administration are now floating the idea of a broader resetting of global economic relations, including introducing taxes of financial inflows, purchases of US bonds, what have you. And that would mean a fundamental challenge to the global economic system as we know it. And this is exactly what the EU and Japan should now be preparing for as we speak. In parallel to all that, there are changes which are of more systemic nature to the global economic exchange, namely the arbitrage over labor costs is evolving. China is outsourcing a lot more to other countries, be it Vietnam or Cambodia, what have you. And also, as Martin Wolf once put it, offices are moving borders. So not only factories are moving borders, but also offices are moving borders. meaning that services are getting outsourced in a way which is difficult to capture in trade statistics because, well, you don't register these things a lot of the times on the border as such. So that's another phenomenon which is sort of taking place in parallel to the turbulence that is taking place at the policy level. So what it leads me to recommend is that EU and Japan deepen their collaboration on economic security and deepen it fast. And there are several areas to look at. I would just want to mention three now for the sake of brevity. So the first would be developing economic security standards for supply chains. This is on the Commission's agenda, and Marco alluded to steps going in that direction. But I think that emphasis needs to be now made much stronger. And the second would be building strategic indispensability together, and I will explain in a second what I would mean by that. And the third would be preventing technology monopolies from occurring. So a couple of words on each. So when it comes to economic security standards, I think if we are to have a systematic and systemic type of global collaboration around the notion of economic security, we need to have a common understanding of what we mean by different things. So that to me means economic security standards, right? And in order to develop them, we would need to define some criteria, starting with what diversification means, how to avoid a single supplier situation, transparency, so that is traceability of inputs, of ownership and value chains, sustainability, and that relates to environmental and social compliance. And it was very interesting to hear just now about this initiative of some of Japan's largest enterprises. And then strategic resilience, meaning ability to absorb shocks. So if you have these criteria, you can then start developing a common risk assessment system. And you can then embody these standards in procurement, in regulation, and in everyday practices. My second point is about building strategic indispensability together. And strategic indispensability is this great Japanese invention in economic security paradigm, which is basically about, if I can offer an interpretation, which I'm sure will be inferior to yours, but let me do it anyway. So strategic indispensability is achieving a level of excellence in technology development that others find so enviable that they come to Japan or Europe, for that matter, to work with us on these technology developments. And Japan is pursuing that in many areas in the semiconductor field. The launch of the Rapidus Corporation in 22. With the aim of mass production of 2-nanometer semiconductors by 27, would be to me an example of this type of development. But the good news is that we can do and we should do a lot of these things together. So on semiconductors, of course, Rapidus is working very closely with IMEC in Leuven, the state-of-the-art research and technology organization that can obviously help a lot in building the technology for these 2-nanometer chip production. So IMEC and Rapidus have a memorandum of cooperation. Rapidus is, as of 23, one of IMEC's co-partner program members. And IMEC is also working with other actors in Japan, like Hokkaido University, on use cases for these 2-nanometer chips. That is equally important, of course, to developing the technology itself, namely that you have to have areas where to employ it effectively. Another field where we don't have such a close collaboration to date, to the best of my knowledge, but we could have one, is EV batteries, so electric vehicle batteries. where Europe and Japan are in a similar situation. So I think we're both underperforming, and we both have the ambition of performing a course correction, namely increasing our share of the global market. So Europe's share is about 7 to 8%. Japan's is about 7%. We have a few gigafactories under construction, although we also have some failed examples like the Northvolt company in Sweden. But here, whoever wins the game for new generation technology will be in the winning position. So Panasonic last year completed its preparations to produce the 4680 EV batteries, the high capacity batteries, which increase range in efficiency. But the research in solid state batteries, so batteries which rely on solid or quasi-solid electrolytes through which the ions pass during charging, and that translates into higher density and improved safety, and hence you get smaller packs of batteries and lighter ones. So that's where research needs to be concentrated, and that's where EU and Japan should be doing research together, because that is about who is in the winning position for next generation technologies. And finally, the third area I want to mention are technologies where there is a risk of a monopoly position developing by someone in the world, and that someone in the world is most likely to be China at the moment, no longer the US. Would have been the US 20 years ago. Now it is China, and this is both defense and space technology, so radar systems for civilian and military use, satellite positioning, but also advanced materials. So in nanoscale materials and technology, Chinese researchers have 58% of top 10% research papers cited at the moment. That's ASPI Institute's technology tracker data. Not everyone agrees with that approach, namely just looking at research papers, because, well, you can obviously do different things with your research papers. You can either take it to implementation or you can put it on the shelf, but nevertheless, it is an indication. So that these are the areas where there is a genuine risk of China most likely developing a monopoly position. So that's an area that the EU and Japan should work very closely together on. So in conclusion, I would say that we have an excellent basis in this relationship. I think we have a lot of mutual trust, which is indispensable and it's invaluable. But we urgently need to build on it to develop a much deeper 2.0, whatever you call this, economic security relationship.
Thank you very much. It's also insightful, and there are several points that we need to really consider about. But at the same time, what came to my mind was the kind of question other myself, nothing related to Japanese government or JAIA, but this is purely my own question. What kind of incentives can we find when we have a collaboration on semiconductor industries or the EV batteries? Because I understand some German or some other companies in Europe already decided to have a collaboration with Chinese EV battery makers. That's reasonable in my understanding as well. And also, we also have the EV battery companies, but the level of our technology on this issue is not as good as Chinese ones. That's also what we need to admit about. So I like that mutual trust matters a lot in diplomacy, but in business field, how if you need to persuade the business sector, how will you explain the real incentives that we need to share among the society? Maybe we have the same difficulty in Japanese society as well, but still, I would like to ask you, from the EU perspective or EU member countries' perspective for each, how can we have a kind of unification of understanding of the economic security issue? Because my second question for you is that if what is the benefit that we have a collaboration framework with EU, not on the as the bilateral framework with some member country, because it is to some extent easier to have a bilateral collaboration with a country in EU, probably. But still, I understand that there need to be a framework as a EU to approach this issue as a whole. And it is always very important for you to maintain the concept of one market. So I would like to ask you is maybe you just need to explain how will you persuade the business sector of member countries. That's my point to you. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Peter Chase, a senior fellow with the German Marshall Fund in Brussels. Peter, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Ito. My name is Peter Chase. I'm a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which is a Washington-based think tank, but has offices here and elsewhere around Europe. We also have a very strong Asia program because we exist to promote transatlantic cooperation in the spirit of the Marshall Plan, which is about democratic and market-based values, as well as European integration. And when promoting that cooperation between the United States and Europe, of course, means in the global world. So we've been working very well, closely with the Japanese counterparts and on China-related issues as well. My own background is I'm a US diplomat for 30 years. I've been retired for a long time. I've represented US business here in Europe, and now I'm working in this think tank. So some of the things I say are going to be very against my own grain as a US diplomat, because as a couple of people have alluded to, the United States' role in this question of economic security, and indeed in the question of Japanese and European cooperation on economic security, is changing. I'll be less diplomatic later on. I think it's really important from my point of view, it's really important I began to understand how important Japan was to the discussion in Europe about economic security around 2014, 2015, when I was working with the US Chamber of Commerce. We were negotiating at that time the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the US and the EU, and Japan was, of course, negotiating the Economic Partnership Agreement. So the METI negotiators used to come and they'd have their negotiating sessions here, and then they'd come over to my office at the US Chamber, and I'd tell them what was going on in the TTIP talks, and they'd tell me what was going on in the EPA talks. But out of that, I started hearing more and more the Japanese people coming in from METI saying, we need to make the Europeans more aware that European technology is appearing on PLA, People's Liberation Army platforms, and it's a direct security threat to us, Japan. And Japan had, I think, in many ways, much more of an impact on the internal discussions in Europe about the security threat that technology leakage implied, and why it was real, because the security problem might have been in Asia, but Japan was able to make it much more real, I think, to people in Europe, not just in Brussels, but in Europe. And so I've watched this debate, this discussion, this partnership between Japan and Europe build up on economic security issues. There was a time when the United States was very much a part of this, and we were all working together because we did see this problem at its roots being related to China, both in terms of the competitiveness side of it and because of both the military threat, but other threats that came from China. I'd say challenges, because I grew up in Taiwan. I'm a China hand. I happen to really enjoy being with Chinese people, but the challenge that China presents is a significant one from a national security as well as economic security point of view. Japan has also done a lot on this because of its proximity to China and because of its awareness and its connections to the Chinese economy. And a lot of the work that you've done has been in the G7. And there, that again has been a very good place for all of us to cooperate, as well as in the OECD. The current US government, Mr. Trump, is all about economic security. I mean, everything he does is economic security, but it's economic security in the United States, and everyone else be damned. That's a shorthand version. But I'm serious. He feels very strongly that American leaders let other countries take advantage of the United States on trade policy and other policy. He does not want to have that happen anymore. I now feel many of the measures that the administration is adopting are a conscious attempt to escape the constraints of a rules-based system, which constrains a powerful country more than others. They're leaving the rules-based system and moving into a power-based system where the United States has a lot of weight. And they're using their weight in a way, in many of the things that the president has done, has been not just against, well, many people are considered economic security threats. And there is a desire to get everyone to go to the United States and produce in the United States to make it all, this is 100% supply chain security if everything's made in the United States. There have been a number of things that he's done with respect to that in terms of his America First trade policy, his 232 reviews, his use of national security as a reason to block imports of products, which was on steel and aluminum, but it's now going to also apply to copper and to lumber and to two other products. I can't remember offhand what they are. Very, very intent on technology leakage and updating our export controls and things of that nature. And this is going to present, I think, a problem for the international community as a whole, I would say for the United States as well, and certainly for the United States as partners. And that gets me to the last 2 points. In that context, I think that what Pawel was saying is absolutely correct. The need for Japan, European cooperation on economic security things is increasing, not just for Japan and Europe, but I would say for more broadly for the global system. And when Pawel was talking about deepening it and what you do to deepen it, and I think that he named a number of things properly, but I would go one step further, and I think that this is important, that Japan and the European Union in particular rely on a rules-based system. They need to be in favor of, not just against what Mr. Trump is doing, not just against the threats and challenges that China presents, but they need to be active advocates for a rules-based system, which they need to re-explain. We need to kind of reunite ourselves to this, but you need to build alliances with other quote unquote, middle power countries, in part to encourage both China and the United States to come back into that system. And then the final point, which I want to make, because I do think that this is important, Mr. Trump and the administration, the federal government of the United States is a part of the United States. But all of this work, going to what you were saying European firms are doing with Chinese firms, all of this work is actually, a lot of it has to do with our private sectors and private sector cooperation. And in previous discussions I've had about US, EU, Japan cooperation on economic security, one of the things that we've stressed is the need to actually be bringing the private sector in a very integrated way, because Japanese have a lot of investment in Europe and in the United States. They're very much part of this network of issues on European security and technology leakage and things of that nature. And there is a huge investment of American firms here, and of course of Japanese and European firms in the United States. This is something that I think that you can't really have this discussion if you're only focused on the government level. It really needs to be very granular, as I think you mentioned a couple of times, Maiko. And that is really at the corporate level. And I'll stop there, and we can, hopefully we can have some time for other questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. Yes, I have been posing several kind of mean questions to each panelist. I'm sorry to say this to Peter, but yes, I agree with the many points you made, and also you actually supported the point I made, how you have a collaboration with the business. I'd like to ask is a little broadly looking at the situation, how you see the future of free trade. Because now we have some actors who is not following the rules-based order as existing order we had. We enjoyed actually. Now China is the one who is not following our rules, but still they're insisting on they need to have a free trade. At the same time, we have an agreement, all of us have agreed on that point that we need to have a free trade as well. But the concept of free trade may be a little different from what they're talking about and what we are understanding of. So we may need to adjust an understanding of or concept of free trade. Or how do you see?
May I jump in very quickly, because
no, actually, I will ask you to yes, give each panelist for maybe 2-3 minutes to answer in a reverse flow. So please, let's start.
Well, just on that, one of the members of the WTO appellate body from the United States was a Professor Jennifer Hillman from Georgetown. She had also been at USTR. Jennifer in 2018 made a beautiful case to the Congress that the United States, Europe, and Japan in particular should lead what she called a big, bold, comprehensive WTO case against China, where the argument is that China, in not adhering to its protocol of accession, so not the question of the actual WTO rules, but its specific promises on accession, had nullified and impaired the benefits that others had had. The basic point that she was trying to make, though, was that you don't need to win this ruling. You need to use this ruling to bring in Indonesia, Thailand, Mexico, Korea, Argentina, Brazil, all of the other countries who now see their economies threatened by China's inherent systemic overcapacity problem. That's that idea of building a diplomatic alliance to tackle China's overcapacity problems, as well as to tackle the United States not necessarily adhering to the rules anymore because of China's problems, I think would be part of it. How you bring in business is a little bit different, but this, that's at the government level. How you bring in business, I think, is a little bit different. But remember that a company, every single company I can think of that is in these high-tech areas has subsidiaries in all three of our areas. They share their technologies all among them. They are deeply concerned that different regulations and different export controls and different things are going to be difficult for them. They also, many firms say the United States uses export controls to give us to give our companies competitive. That's not what our firms say. Our firms will say that sometimes the government is protecting individual firms, but you really need to bring firms and the people who do export controls and things like that to the table to talk about things. And when you do that, you'll often find that the person from an American company is actually going to be based in Europe. Do you see what I mean? That that's the sort of thing that I think could be done. And one place we do not talk about enough as a forum for this is the OECD and the BIAC. And using that as a forum for this sort of in-depth discussion, I think could be would be one of my suggestions.
Thank you, Peter. I suppose many audiences here have come up with plenty of questions to you. And I'd like to ask the each panelist to answer not only my question, but also if you have any comments on the other panelists' speech, please take time of that as well. Pawel, please, what's yours?
Thank you so much. I would very much like to second what Peter just said about the advocacy role, which needs to be very loud and very outspoken. And maybe one example from within the obvious territory for EU-Japan is Mexico and Mexico's attitude to trade. 30 years ago, Mexico decided to, or took a bet, one could put it that way, to engage in a close relationship with the United States, by means of which, at the moment, the bulk of Mexico's exports, manufacturing exports, go to the US, right? But it's not impossible to think that if the current economic and trade war continues and escalates, countries like Mexico will reflect and will come up with answers which are not necessarily in line with the open international trading system. I hope this does not materialize, but I think we need to be aware that stakes are very high. Not only where EU and Japan are concerned directly, but also when it comes to other countries. And it's true that both Japan and EU have a lot to tell the rest of the world. The EU prides itself on being #1 trading partner to, 72 countries in the world, 38% of global trades. That is an enormous asset in itself, which means that advocacy of open economic security and open trade is just so important. The one issue which we maybe have not discussed in detail, but which I sense will come to be present on the EU-Japan agenda is the currency dimension, namely. The bulk of EU-Japan trade is denominated in the US dollar. I've seen the figure of 70%. And of course, we now have a lot of creative thinking, let's put it that way, in Washington, D.C., about how to move away from the role of the dollar in the international exchange system. And I think both EU and Japan have given a lot of thought to the international role of the euro and the yen. And there's a lot of merit in thinking about it, especially as Europe wants to strengthen its capital markets, as it wants to launch the savings union. Now, for that, a broader international role of the euro would clearly be conducive. It surely comes with downsides as well, and the pressure on the exchange rate and competitiveness implications are just one, perhaps the obvious one to cite. But I do see in Europe and Japan promoting euro-yen invoicing in the future. I do see EU and Japan using the euro and the yen in their public procurement frameworks. I think we will see an expansion of currency swap agreements also between the two blocs, between Europe and Japan. I think we will have a deepening of the financial market infrastructure also for that exchange to be denominated in the euro and the yen. I just put it on the map as an issue that that we will need to address as we go along. But going directly to the question that you asked, namely, what can we do with regards to the business operators? I think the point that Marco made, referring to the Net Zero Industrial Act, namely the resilience criteria, are a case to the point. So in the funding arrangements for EV batteries, to stick to that example, there is also a battery call that the European Commission announced in December last year. It's one of the few to come. And in such funding instruments, you could also have criteria that promote diversification of supplies, right? So I think that's entirely possible. It's entirely possible to envisage a jointly funded project as well. That EU and Japan pursue in conjunction. And finally, there is, of course, the regulatory aspect. Were we to cooperate more closely on new areas, emerging areas like recycled batteries, batteries that rely on recycled components. I think that's where the regulatory aspects are, of course, extremely important, because they do define the parameters of the emerging markets. So I think we do have quite a few instruments. The challenge will be to focus on that strategically, as both EU and Japan pursue their own agendas, which where we cannot complain of an insufficient number of issues to address. So it's more the crowding out effect that I would fear than the lack of will and dedication. It's more to find strategically the space and the time and the resources for EU and Japan to do things together. I think the means will be found. The means do exist. It's more about carving out that joint strategic will to work on these things together.
Thank you very much for the comments on the positive future that I agree with you. Maiko, it's your turn.
Thank you so much. So your question about the implication in Japanese whole industry when Japan start complying with EU value-based regulations. So my answer is, first of all, this is extremely important. Like it's a personal view, but the human rights, for example, like in a dry number, okay, North Korea now like 10 million people are starving, dying. It's number, but it's reality. There's a people who is dying, starving, giving food for your kid, choose to die. I'm a grandmother, so I die for my generation. So absolutely human rights issue, like and also other example, like long-time imprisonment in any other country. So as such, human rights due diligence and other or just personal information protection or any other type of regulation to be needed in Japan and EU, especially this is an area that Japan should learn more from EU's value and working towards for the better future. So that's that said, it's such a tricky area to really comply, because first of all, that might affect industry, the extra cost. Any compliance program needs extra cost. Lucky that all the Japanese electronics now, like NEC is supporting. But what happened to other industry? And then Japan and EU both has a declining economy right now, so it's not that easy choice. Also, it's a less likely concern, but the over compliance with any regulation is the issue. When it comes to the, say for example, U.S. OFAC regulation, analogy of U.S. OFAC, sometimes I see over compliance with all other jurisdictions' roles for the industry's benefit, or that's a risk mitigation they have to do, while that overall that collectively create the slowdown of the industry growth or the investment to certain higher risk area for industry viewpoint. That's like as a whole government of view, maybe they might promote, but the industry I don't want to have in touch any possibility that subject my country is subject to say OFAC sanction, for example. That's of course that's a strong. So, so as such, this over compliance could be another risk, not a big implication as a cost comparing to the overall cost to the industry or cost and burden. It's a smaller risk, but there's always when it comes to compliance, there's always a risk of over compliance. These are two areas, and then lastly, that's aside from that. Well, after we see all the positive side of the hope, I have to cover the cloud again to your argument. So because say Japan, like one side, Japan and EU have lots of room to collaborate, but at the same time, in the national security area, we all heavily depend on the US you know, like a US. So as such a complex, we are not only talking about the economic, but all the other national security and political context. It's so difficult to really collaborate and keep all the other people hold a hand. Don't go there. Don't go faster. Don't shake hands with, you know, like, as such, it's such a difficult, complex job. I heavily rely on to the diplomat and the industry. And but lastly, Japan Economic Quadrant, for example, that was like first brought in the G7 summit meeting when in Germany, and next in 2022, I believe. And next year, when it comes to Japan, then like the G7 established further anti-coercion initiative. So as such, you know, like G7 is not EU, but we should use all the tools, the connection channel, to, you know, create one voice and address to the major power. So
Thank you, Michael. I agree with you, the point that the US need to be considered when we talk about economic security always. But we may need another session to do so. So just thank you for putting the point. And last but not least, Marco, please, and please take your time to comment overall.
Thank you, Professor Eto, and thanks to all the co-panelists for. I have a lot of elements that have been raised that I was writing down and saying absolutely agree, yes indeed, and I have to say that the reading that has been presented by the co-panelists very much aligned with the type of reflection that is happening also within the Commission when it comes to the fora, to discuss issues, the need to accelerate and deepen it fast, Pawel said. And I agree. We have discussed a lot with Japan. I think that's amazing how we coincide in the diagnosis of the issues and the risks. There's I would say almost a perfect overlap. And now when we talk about resilience, especially because now we're adopting NZIA and implementing acts, for instance, there's the need for the political level decision to step it up before we actually agree on our internal criteria, because then what do you want to cooperate on? We have our criteria enshrined in our legislation. You know what? That's how it is. And so it is important. And I think there's really that reflection ongoing, especially because I think one important element of the new Commission is how strong the awareness has become that the external dimension is so strictly interrelated to the single market and the internal policy, being it Green Deal or digitalization or economic security. I think there's the awareness that there's to be a closer and closer link with the external dimension. And that's a priority of my commissioner from that point of view. You mentioned, you asked me the question on outbound investment. And I mean, on the inbound investment, we have done a lot. We have even reviewed it. The outbound investment is somehow new. And reflection is still ongoing as to whether we need to fill the gaps. And you seem to be hinting that there is a gap there to be filled. And I think, but take it as my personal opinion somehow, but that's it's more than just mine. Of course, this is an issue that is being also, the developments in the US are also somehow driving that because of the extraterritorial reach that might come from certain measures, not only by the US, but subsequent responses by China as well. So it's something that needs to be factored in, and that's part of the ongoing reflection. Now, we do trade, when it comes to China, we do trade almost 2 billion euros a day. Yeah? And okay, these are goods, but just to say that a great deal of what we deal and also a great deal of what we invest is not, strictly speaking, economic security. And it's important for the global wealth that is preserved. A major cosmetic EU producer was telling me they actually have their turnover is 1/3 in China, 1/3 in Europe, and 1/3 in the US. That dynamic has to be preserved. And when we talk about outbound investment, we're talking about very specific issues that somehow are already being affected, either because of investment choices, that it's not the right moment to start settling in China for the production of specific components. And I think that independently from the regulatory framework, industry is actually taking those measures, not least because of the fear of not being able to enter with their products the United States. That is also an element there. But that reflection is not finished internally, and it's not an easy one, as I have to say. Now, you asked, and there was a question to, I think it was to Pawel, how do you persuade the business sector? And I felt I called also up on that, because it is an issue. It is a fundamental issue, because, and it's, I think, even more of an issue for the European side than it is for Japan, because there's a closer connection between domestic business and METI. And they speak very, very frequently and very effectively. And for us, not least because we have a European business basis, but it's very often also national one in the first place. It's not that easy, but ultimately you do that by identifying areas that you know will have a business, will generate business interest. You do guide your regulatory framework in a way that you can somehow show a direction, and then you put on in place incentives. And the three things, if you do it properly, it works. We have just one example. Japan is recently become an associated, I think, member. It's a partner. It's called of Horizon Europe. That's an example of where partnership it's institutionally there to do something together. On batteries, I won't get into details because I can't, but I know that there are important companies in Japan working with EU investors in green high tech. And there's an avenue there that we need to support. My last comment is on WTO and OECD, because I fully agree with Peter. I have to say that if I compare with I was posted in Geneva for a few years to the WTO, and when I came back, I was sadly looking at how the WTO was being treated as something, the place where, okay, whatever gets there gets stuck there. It doesn't solve the issue of China. It's the end of the effectiveness of multilateralism, and so on and so forth. But I do sense now, in talking to colleagues, talking to other partners, that people are rediscovering, thanks to President Trump, if we can say that, the importance of rules. Because rules give the only possible response in a situation of uncertainty and a legal insecurity in a way. And that can become an opportunity to redesign WTO rules. I say something that is no surprise. Of course, China is strongly interested in that. Maybe it's also a way of addressing some of the issues that we have been raising with China on industrial subsidies as part of the package. And finally, OECD and G7. I totally agree that we need to make use of that as much as possible.
Thank you, Marco. I agree with all the points you made. And due to my poor moderation, the time is almost ended, but we still have 2 more minutes to get open the floor. Maybe 1 or 2 questions. I understand. I know many questions should come, but someone who really want to raise and please raise. Then don't be hesitant to do so. Please, 1 or 2 questions I would like to take. Please identify the question to go through.
Well, my name is Vera Rodriguez. I'm a researcher at the European Institute for Asian Studies. And my main question when talking about enhancing economic partnerships, especially in tech, where Japan is building its tech industry, and also the EU needs to do so due to US over-reliance and etc. How do we ensure that some EU member states don't perceive Japan as a competitor for their industrial growth?
I think all the panelists can answer the question, but you want to ask which?
No, everybody, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm chair of international politics at the University of Tokyo. I'm so happy to be back to Brussels, where I used to be working at the Commission Cellule de Prospective back in the last century. I have a question to Peter Chase. I'm so attracted by your idea about this sort of political use of WTO. But before buying into your idea completely, just can I ask a couple of questions shortly? Just short questions. One is that China's problem is not only over productive capacity, but sometimes, quite often, they use a sort of procedural method to de facto ban the importation of goods. Nobody knows in Europe that the China de facto bans the importation of marine goods, products, and then also agricultural goods from Japan almost completely. Now, technically, they're just formally focusing on, a few prefectures around Fukushima, but they require some safety document or whatever, so that they de facto banning basically all the importation, which is huge amount of, the sum involved. So do you think that the same method can be used for this WTO political use? Basically, you don't need to win the case at WTO, but suing China, based on this sort of dubious procedural, sort of method. And second question: is it politically viable, flying? As Marco said, that it's an opportunity because of Mr. Trump, but also because of Mr. Trump, the China's market looks more attractive. Don't want to lose that sort of big market. And there's always a cocktail effect, or sort of everybody's seduced to bandwagon China. If Japan sues China, the EU is going to get on the board. I don't know. So I just want to know about this political viability. Thank you.
Goes Marco in the second of.
Yes. Well, on the question on whether Japan can be seen as a competitor, I mean, the same question asked 30 years ago would have had a very completely different answer. I can say that even as deputy chief negotiator of the Japan EPA, Japanese companies have been in Europe so long that they are not seen as competitor, but actually part of the European industrial world somehow. So I don't see that, and especially when we talk about the type of technologies that would be needed and the cooperation on tech leakage. On some of those technologies, unfortunately, we are far behind both of them. So the level of cooperation would actually be an incentive to do it. And for the other type of technologies, traditional ones, we are not in that level of competition that used to be the case decades ago. So I don't see that problem. The problem is the one that Pawel has identified, as mentioned before. We need to put the finger on what is really needed and choose the projects or the type of cooperation that will make the difference in terms of tech development, in terms of reducing dependencies, depending what you want to develop. That is the challenge. And that's where it's difficult to identify the priorities. And it's very difficult, of course, on the European side, because we have to bring together also priorities coming from different member states. So that type of exercise is a very difficult synthesis that needs to be done. And that is the challenge for me.
Peter, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. First, on the use of regulatory instruments to create effective bans. These are often measures that go against TBT and SPS rules, which require essentially science-based decision-making. And frankly, as a person who spent a lot of time dealing with American trade issues, we have a lot of those problems here in Europe too. I mean, I'm thinking of genetically modified organisms, which basically ban, U.S. crops from being sent here and things of that nature. But that actually underscores the point. If we want a rules-based system to really work, we actually have to commit to it. And the rules that we wrote in the WTO actually are extremely well balanced in many, many respects. And I think it behooves all of us to be a little bit, we lose something in our negotiations, and we have to accept that we lost that bit in this negotiation in order to get that bit over here. That was the exchange that came up in those WTO negotiations, and we all have to learn to accept that. That having been said, I think it is also important that that we all say that rules can change and commitments under the rules-based system can change. But there are mechanisms for doing that properly, not Mr. Trump's way. But for instance, Ignacio Garcia Becerra was the major negotiator for the TTIP. He reflected on the US stance on the WTO. And he said, one of the rulings on anti-dumping that the WTO did on double zeroing was possibly legally, technically correct, but politically dumb. And so he was thinking, how do we change the rule in a way that actually helps the United States to recommit to the WTO? This was pre-Mr. Trump, but there is always going to be room for smart people, particularly middle powers, to work together to nudge, because sometimes that's all you can do. The more powerful countries back into that construct.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you very much for hearing all the discussion. I'm sorry that the time is already 6 minutes past from the original closing time, but I'm kind of sure that you all enjoyed the fruitful discussion amongst the experts today. And please join me to thank the panelists, wonderful panelists. Thank you for everyone.